The clinking of silverware struck too sharply against the worn walls of the dining room. We sat down for dinner on Munjoy Hill, the scent of baked haddock still hanging in the air, when my mother slammed her fork onto the table as if staking a claim. Her voice cut through the room, hard and unyielding. You have 24 hours to get your things out. This house belongs to your brother now. At first, the words felt unreal. I scanned my father's face, hoping for contradiction, but he didn't even glance up from his plate. My brother Rogan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smug curve tugging at his lips. Silence pressed down on me heavier than any storm rolling in from Casco Bay. I looked around the room I had poured years into. Fresh paint on the trim, windows replaced after the last nor'easter, floorboards I'd refinished myself. None of it mattered now. One sentence had erased it all. My chest tightened, but I refused to give them the argument they were waiting for. I set my napkin down and pushed my chair back without a word. My mother's eyes narrowed, expecting an outburst, but I gave her nothing. My father sipped his water like a man who had already picked a side. Rogan smirked, already counting victory. The home that had been my refuge was slipping away. Still, I kept my voice calm and my steps steady. Outside on the porch, the wind from the bay cut through me, but it brought clarity. They believed my silence was surrender, that 24 hours would break me. They were wrong. The house felt quiet after the confrontation, each corner humming with memory. I moved slowly through the rooms, my footsteps soft on the boards I'd sanded myself. In the kitchen, the faint scent of varnish lingered from nights I stayed up brushing cabinets no one else cared to touch. My hands had scrubbed away the stains, my paychecks had bought the new appliances, yet it was now claimed as someone else's gift. I drifted into the living room, letting my fingers graze the warm beige walls I'd painted only 2 summers ago. I remembered standing on a ladder, roller in hand, determined to bring light to the space after years of gray. Rogan had been away, chasing contracts in other states, too busy to answer calls. My parents had murmured their appreciation then, but it had faded. Tonight, the walls felt mute, their glow dimmed by betrayal. Upstairs, I paused outside the small bedroom I had made my own. Memories of the storm 5 years ago rushed back, wind tearing shingles from the roof, rain pouring through the attic leaks. My father had thrown up his hands, claiming nothing could be done without money. I had written the checks to the contractor, drained my savings, and taken overtime at work to cover the rest. Those repairs proved I could protect us even when the world raged outside. I touched the stair railing, still smooth from sanding away splinters. My grandfather Silas had stood here once, voice rough but kind, saying, "These boards will need your hand someday." At the time, I thought he meant chores. Now his words carried weight, as if he had foreseen this night. I paused at the front door, the air cooler here, salt from the harbor drifting in through the seams. The house seemed to breathe with me, carrying the weight of everything I had poured into it. Tomorrow, I would need answers, and I already knew who to call. I barely slept, the house pressing in with a silence that no longer felt safe. At dawn, I wrapped a coat around my shoulders and stepped onto the porch, gazing east toward the bay, pale light just beginning to shimmer. My phone felt heavy as I scrolled to Sloan Merrick's number. We had met years ago at Bodawin, both restless to prove ourselves. She had gone into law, sharp-minded and uncompromising, and I trusted her judgment completely. When she answered, her voice carried the same no-nonsense edge I remembered. I told her everything. The dinner, my mother's decree, my father's silence, Rogan's smug grin. She listened without interrupting, the faint scratch of her pen audible over the line. When I finally paused, she exhaled. "Maris, first things first, you are not being legally evicted. A parent yelling at dinner is not a notice. The law requires due process. They can't just push you out overnight." Her certainty steadied me, but the sting of betrayal still clung. "They gave me 24 hours, I said. "They mean to hand it to Rogan. Then we start gathering proof. Receipts, mortgage records, emails, or contracts from when you covered their debts. And one more thing, probate files. Do you know if your grandfather left a will?" The question hit me. I remember Silas's rough voice, his hand on the railing, telling me the house would always need me. I assumed it had passed straight to them. Never assume, Sloane said firmly. If a will exists and it names you, your parents may not have had the authority to gift the house at all. I'll have someone search the probate court today. I leaned against the porch column, cold seeping through my coat, but a flicker of warmth built in my chest. For the first time since last night, I felt less like a trespasser in my own life. I'll gather everything, I said. Good. The tide's already shifting. Don't waste energy on arguments. Find the rocks and stand on them. Her words stayed with me as I went back inside, pulling open drawers for folders of bank statements and receipts. By mid-afternoon, Sloane called, voice urgent. Maris, I found something. I pressed the phone to my ear as she explained. A clerk at the Cumberland County Probate Court had pulled every file tied to Silas Alden's estate. Among them was a notarized will dated 3 years before his death, simple and direct. His broad signature sealed the house on Munjoy Hill solely to me. My knees buckled, and I sank into the armchair I had bought with my first real paycheck. For a moment, the room tilted. I thought of evenings on the porch with my grandfather, his hand steady on mine as he pointed out ships crawling across Casco Bay. He had trusted me to keep the house alive. Why didn't they tell me? I whispered, voice cracking. The will was filed, Sloane replied. Your parents knew and chose to act like it didn't exist. They couldn't bear the truth that Silas passed over them and Rogan. A hot flush rose in my chest. I pictured my mother's narrowed eyes at dinner, my father refusing to look at me, Rogan's smirk. The betrayal wasn't just last night. It had been years in the making. They buried my grandfather's decision to protect Rogan's pride, giving him a stage he hadn't earned. Sloane's voice sharpened. We can enforce this. I'll prepare a petition, but you need to stay calm. Gather receipts, document your contributions, keep everything organized. They'll fight. The signature on that document carried more weight than anyone's performance. I stared at the copy Sloane had sent moments later, the black ink stark against my phone screen. His handwriting, familiar loops I'd seen in old letters, marked my name as if I were heir. They had hidden it, hoping that silence would erase me. But that silence was about to end. I rose to my feet, the decision solidifying in my bones like stone. If they expected me out in 24 hours, then in 24 hours, they would discover whose house this truly was. The next morning, I moved fast, determined to act before my parents returned or Rogan appeared with his suitcase. I called Portland Harbor Movers, explained the rush, only a few large items to move, nothing more. The man hesitated at the short notice, but by noon, he promised a crew would arrive. While I waited, I walked the house armed with sticky notes and a pen. I tagged only what I had bought: the slate gray sofa I had saved months to afford, the stainless steel washer I installed in the basement, the curtains I picked to match the beige walls. Each note was both a memory and a receipt, proof of my labor when no one else would lift a finger. In the dining room, I paused at the oak table my grandfather had crafted decades ago. The chairs around it were mine, sturdy and new, bought after my mother complained about the wobbly originals. I tagged them but left the table untouched. The cedar chest in the hall, filled with old quilts, remained as well. I wanted no accusations of theft. I wanted the truth clean and untainted. Through the window, I saw Mrs. Penfield across the street watching. Moments later, she knocked softly and stepped inside, her eyes kind but searching. You've always been good to this house, she said. I've seen you paint, mend, and haul things in storms. It belongs to you as much as it ever did to him. Her words steadied me more than she could know. Soon after, Tom Keegan passed by on his walk from the docks, dust still on his boots. He glanced at the porch beams I had reinforced years ago. Your grandfather would be proud, he muttered. By the time the movers arrived with their white truck, every room was mapped out in small squares of colored paper. I hadn't taken everything, only what was mine. And when Rogan stepped through the door, that distinction would matter more than he realized. The movers had just loaded the sofa onto the truck when the sound of tires grinding on the driveway caught my attention. Rogan emerged from a rented sedan, a sleek black suitcase trailing behind him. He looked at the house as if it were already his stage, chin high, shoulders squared. brushing past me without a word. His shoes echoed on the bare floorboards, the emptiness greeting him louder than any sentence could. He stopped short where the sofa had been, turning slowly. "What the hell happened?" he demanded. "I took what was mine," I said evenly. He spun, eyes narrowing. "This is sabotage. Mom and Dad gave me this house, and you gutted it before I even moved in." I crossed my arms, refusing to meet his fire with my own. "The washer, the chairs, the sofa, I paid for them. I have every receipt. Furnish it yourself if you want to call it home." Rogan's face flushed, his anger breaking into something else, fear. He sank onto his suitcase, rubbing his temples. "You don't understand. My contracting business is collapsing. Investors are circling, and I promised them collateral." His voice fell. "Layla's pregnant. I need this house. It's not just for me." The words hit harder than I expected. For a brief moment, I saw the boy I grew up with, scraped knees, and kite flying on the Eastern prom. But that boy was gone. Now he wanted my silence and sacrifice to fix his mistakes. "I'm not your collateral," I said softly. "And our grandfather didn't pick you for this house. He picked me. You may not like it, but that's the truth," Rogan hissed, desperation boiling into rage. "You'll regret this. They'll make sure of it." I stood firm as the movers slammed the truck doors, each bang punctuating the air. Rogan looked around one last time, seeing not missing furniture, but his entitlement slipping away. 2 mornings later, I stood beside Sloan in Cumberland County Probate Court, clutching the copy of my grandfather's will like a lifeline. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polish. My parents sat rigid across the aisle, statues of their own pride. Rogan shifted, restless, the skin around his eyes tight with sleeplessness. Sloan rose first. Her voice was steady as she laid out the sequence of events. Silas Alden's notarized will, the mortgage payments I had made, receipts for repairs, affidavits from neighbors who witnessed my care for the house. She moved with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this for years. My mother's rebuttal was sharp, rehearsed. "Silas always wanted the house to stay in the family," she said, assuming intent mattered more than paperwork. My father nodded, avoiding my gaze. They spoke of Rogan's needs, his future child, his role as eldest. The judge raised a hand. "Intent is not stronger than a notarized document. The will is clear. The property belongs to Maris Alden. Until probate is fully enforced, no transfer or occupancy may occur. The restraining order stands." The gavel struck, a sound like thunder. My parents flinched. Rogan's face hardened. For the first time since the dinner on Munjoy Hill, I felt solid ground beneath me. Later, I returned to the house. The movers had left it half empty, but the silence no longer felt like loss. I entered the kitchen, opened the drawer of rattling keys, and picked the old brass one Silas had kept on a leather string. I placed it on the counter, not as an offering, but as a marker. This key was no one's bargaining chip. It was proof of what had been decided years before I ever thought I'd need it. When I locked the door behind me, I knew the battle wasn't over, but the story they had written about me was already unraveling. The official deed arrived a week later, my name printed where my parents had tried to erase it. I sat at my small apartment desk, tracing the letters with my finger, not with triumph, but with calm. The court had sided with me. Law affirmed what Silas left behind, but I felt no need to claim victory in the living room. Instead, I wandered the streets of Munjoy Hill, pausing at the waterfront where I had stood with my grandfather as a child. He believed in houses not as trophies, but as anchors, keeping families and neighbors steady through storms. I thought of Mrs. Penfield watching from her porch, of Tom Keegan nodding at the beams I had repaired. They were part of this story, too. The idea came quietly. I would keep the deed, but not in the way my parents or Rogan imagined. I met with a local land trust protecting homes for working families along the harbor. Within days, we drafted a lease placing the house in their program, keeping it affordable and safe. In return, I kept a small upstairs studio, a single room with a window facing Casco Bay. When I signed the lease, relief washed over me. The house would stand, but it would not serve Rogan's ego or my parents' manipulations. It would serve the community, and I could enter only when I chose. That evening, I unlocked the studio and set my bag on the floor. The rooms below would soon belong to another family, their voices filling the silence that once weighed me down. I sat in the studio with the deed and lease papers stacked neatly beside me. I opened a blank notebook and began a letter to my parents. I wrote plainly, I would not rescue them, cover bills, or quiet their mistakes. If they wanted contact, counseling was the only condition, not punishment, but a test of trust. I enclosed receipts, the court order, and the will. No debate, only clarity. When I sealed the envelope, my hands were steady. It wasn't anger that guided me, but the need to break the cycle. A knock at the door startled me. Mrs. Penfield stood there with a basket of muffins. For the woman who kept the porch standing, she said, smiling softly. Her words filled the room with warmth that paper alone could never carry. Later, Tom Keegan stopped me on the street, clapping my shoulder firmly. Silas would have wanted it this way, he said simply. And I believed him. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from Rogan. Sure, stripped of bravado. He admitted mistakes, voiced fears, and asked for time to make amends. For the first time, his words were a request, not a demand. I left it unanswered. The letter to my parents was ready for the morning mail. The final step still lay ahead. Months later, laughter filled the rooms below. A young family had settled under the land trust lease, toys scattered across the porch where I once stacked storm shutters. It gave me more peace than emptiness ever had. My small studio remained, a single room with wide windows overlooking Casco Bay. Each morning, sunlight stretched across the water, steadying me in a way I hadn't felt for years. On one wall, I hung the framed deed beside Silas's old repair map of Munjoy Hill, penciled notes marking years of shingles replaced after hurricanes, beams reinforced after blizzards. Not a trophy, but a compass, a reminder of true stewardship. The space was simple, desk, chair, bed near the window. It belonged to no one but me. I wrote often, sometimes coding, sometimes letters never sent. Letters to my younger self who thought silence meant peace. Downstairs, the family painted, cooked, lived. The house was alive in a way that didn't drain me. It no longer mattered to prove myself with every nail or dollar spent. My worth rested in the boundaries I had drawn, the life I had chosen, and the doors I had learned when to close. If you enjoyed this story and want more tales of resilience, justice, and family, don't forget to subscribe to my channel.